Hello, I am Austin Baker of Baker's Dozens Productions. And on today's episode of Exploring Experiences with Austin Baker, we have a really special treat for you guys. So today I am joined by Chris Lafave of the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library. I spoke with him for about 30 minutes. I've met him before during one of the school trips that I took my students on to the Vonnegut Museum and Library. And so we have a great little discussion for you today about the museum, how it keeps its experiences fresh, how it becomes part of the local community, and of course, Vonnegut himself as a person and an author and his works. So without further ado, here is Chris Lafave. All
Hey,
right. So I am here today with Chris Lafave of the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library. He is the curator. And welcome to the show, Chris.
hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, very excited. Before we dive in here, I just kind of wanted to say that the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library probably is quickly becoming one of my favorite institutions in Indianapolis. So it really means a lot for you and your organization to come onto this little podcast that I do. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. That's our pleasure to host you.
Yep. Okay, so I guess without further ado, let's just dive right in. So first question I have here. Can you give the audience a little bit of a background about the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library, as well as yourself, and maybe how your paths kind of came to cross?
Yeah, we are a museum that first opened the original location in January 2011. We have both a museum and a library. We host thousands of people year round. We give tours. We try to be as all encompassing towards Vonnegut's life as we can. We feature his artwork, his literature, some of his values, such as free speech, common decency, and anti-war. We have a jazz exhibit even because he was a jazz fanatic. He called jazz safe sex of the highest order. And of course, we're located on Indiana Avenue, so that works as a tribute to the phenomenal history of this location in Indianapolis as well. Used to be a neighborhood full of music venues that great artists like Wes Montgomery, Freddie Hubbard, and J.J. Johnson cut their teeth on. So yeah, we have this phenomenal three-story museum now. That we opened this one in 2019. And yeah, we always encourage people from all over the world to come visit and celebrate the life of a great writer and artist who had a lot to say about interesting subject matters and sometimes had funny things to say about things that aren't funny, which was comforting to a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what about yourself? Can you give a little bit of background about how you came to the Vonnegut Museum?
Yeah, I got into Vonnegut a little bit in college when I was at Ball State. A friend of mine loaned me Breakfast of Champions. I think bits and pieces of that book maybe went over my head when I was 22. There's a lot of nice, delightful, vulgar drawings in there. And then maybe Slaughterhouse-Five when I was young too, but I don't think it was until I was living in Chicago in 2007 when the economy tanked that I happened to check Cat's Cradle out of the library. And his ability to write religion, weaponry, and the end of the world, like something truly apocalyptic,
Yeah,
filled with death and tragedy, usually at the cost of human stupidity and just simple human folly, was so comforting that he could be so funny
yeah,
about something that was so frightening. And I remember being deeply frightened back then and just
yeah.
thinking, wow, Kurt Vonnegut kind of helped me with that. So a couple of years later, I was doing library science at IUPUI, and the Vonnegut Museum, the brand new Vonnegut Museum, needed volunteers, and that's kind of how it all came about.
So you started off as a volunteer and kind of worked your way up. That is so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, early 2011. Yeah.
Wow. So you've been there since 2011. So that's when they moved to the new location, right?
We moved to the new location in 2019. The
19.
old
Sorry.
the old yeah. I want to make sure that we got the history correct. Julia Whitehead is the CEO and founder of the Vonnegut Museum. She was a medical writer with Eli Lilly, and she came up with the idea. And She started up the 501c3 and everything. We opened the original space was at the corner of Senate and Vermont,
Okay.
and it was in the Amelie building. And then at the end of 2018, we moved the museum briefly into the Circle Center Mall.
Really?
Yeah, we had a presence at the Circle Center Mall, and then in November of 2019, we had the grand opening of the permanent home of the Vonnegut Museum, which is located at 543 Indiana Avenue. Um, yeah, at the three-way stop between Indiana Avenue, West Street. Actually, I think it's just Indiana Avenue and West Street. Yeah,
Yeah, I know it comes up fast because the few times I've
it
driven there,
does.
I'm like, oh, there's the entrance. I got to go around.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, no kidding.
But no, I've been there a handful of times. It is a lovely building and a lovely exhibits. Very very fun. But yeah, so you kind of already touched upon my second question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So obviously, Vonnegut has history in Indiana, specifically Indianapolis. But otherwise, why Vonnegut? Why dedicate an entire museum to one author?
Well, he was so uniquely famous. Like it's not only did he go around for years giving a speech called "How to Get a Job Like Mine,"
Mhm.
where the somewhat tongue-in-cheek answer was "You kind of can't." He didn't mean it in a mean way or anything like that, but most of the famous authors or the semi-famous authors of the world, in order to quit your, I think the best way I want to compare this actually is years ago there was like a Pitchfork article that said the drummer from Sonic Youth is a bartender in New York City.
Yeah.
And I don't know if maybe someone said something sassy to him about it, but he said, unless your last name is Jagger or Richards, you probably have a day job.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of what Vonnegut meant by it, is that Slaughterhouse-Five just happened to be so risky, so daring, so challenging, so surprisingly readable on top of all of that. And it just happened to come out in 1969 at the height of the Vietnam movement. So, even today, there are many schools, not just in Indiana, but across the country and maybe even the world, where Slaughterhouse-Five is taught in school.
Yeah.
Because it's such an important literary landmark. On top of that, he wrote so many other books, some of which have like a cult following, like Breakfast of Champions or Sirens of Titan. He created so many people that weren't necessarily Fairweather fans,
Yeah.
because he had a sense of humor that either works tremendously for you or it doesn't necessarily work for you. So imagine how famous you have to get to blow through that. and still be so, if you turn to page 5 of Breakfast of Champions, there's a giant drawing of an asshole. Yeah. So there's an awful lot of fame to blow
Yeah.
through that. And I think so that's a big, I think that's why, how do I want to phrase this? He is so popular because he made so many people feel like they weren't crazy. Like
Yeah.
the stuff that freaked them out or made them uncomfortable about society was actually happening, and that their reaction to it, feeling depressed or scared or alone or something like that, wasn't necessary. It didn't make them less.
Yeah.
And I hate to use like new wave language like that, but
Right.
Vonnegut's writing for a lot of people probably made them feel a little bit seen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could see specifically, I mean, even nowadays, I could feel like that would be a very comforting thing to read some of his works. I actually just started Cat's Cradle, no surprise. So
Yeah.
yeah, I am looking forward to, getting deeper into that and, just, I feel like it will be comforting.
There's a line about we just finished up with Valentine's Day. There's a line in Mother Night that's really, really beautiful about how human beings need uncritical love.
Yeah.
And there's another line in the novel Slapstick where he talks about, I wish people who fight all the time, who are supposedly supposed to love each other, would say, please, a little bit less love and a little more common decency.
Yeah.
And, so I always thought that was really interesting that he kind of used his art to try and encourage people to kind of pick their battles.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's really good advice in the world.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I just did good advice in general, but yeah, it's always good. It's always good to hear it, especially from a not even a source of authority, but like you were saying, somebody who is well renowned and famous, and has these works that have spanned decades and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question is a little bit more about the museum itself. So we talk a lot on this podcast about layered experiences, quote unquote. So basically this idea that a lot of places like museums and themed entertainment venues and things of that nature have this sort of big idea or main goal in mind that they are trying to get their audience towards. And when we talk about layered experiences, we're basically just talking about like providing different channels and different paths for various demographics all to arrive kind of at the similar goal. And I think your guys' museum does that really well. So my question kind of is, how do you find that balance between the sort of traditional museum experience and sort of all of the extracurricular stuff that the institution does? Like I see you do like like book clubs, and you do like literary events and tutoring, and you rent out you can rent out the lounge and stuff like that. So how do you find that balance between the sort of traditional museum that some people would kind of prefer and this more modern institution that you see more and more nowadays?
Man, that's a really good question. Um, I think there's parts of it, like, you would always want your museum to be a community center,
Right.
welcoming towards others. Um, I think for many years now, that's not only needed from a funding perspective, but also something you want to do for your society.
Yeah.
You want to have live music, you want people to be able to get married on site, um, stuff along those lines. And you want to be able to be open to new experiences.
Of course.
Um, yeah, so I mean, I don't have a super canned answer to that. I don't
Yeah, that's
think,
fine.
like, we juggle it on a case by case basis. Um, yeah.
Okay. And so kind of follow up to that. So how do you as a curator try to keep things maybe fresh, maybe for to draw in new audience members, or to, keep the experience kind of fresh for repeat visitors and members?
Yeah, we change out exhibits as frequently as we can. We also try to keep Slaughterhouse Five and Kurt at 100 stable, because some people are going to come here and not know very much about Kurt Vonnegut. I mean, that's
Yep.
just reality. So
Yeah.
you have to have a way for people to learn Kurt Vonnegut's life story while they're here.
Yeah.
Um, so you hope that you get new exhibit items. One way in which we're very fortunate is that Kurt Vonnegut was a man of letters.
Yes.
So he wrote an unbelievable number of letters to people, many of which they kept. So one thing that we're able to display to the general public is letters that Kurt Vonnegut wrote, and hopefully we will continue to collect those over time. And that's something that nearly everybody wants to see,
So
because every
you're still getting new letters, like,
oh
or
yeah, yeah. Like, I
new.
think in November we recently took in a collection of a guy whose brother got a letter not only from Kurt Vonnegut but also from Tom Wolfe, author of the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test.
Wow.
Both were pretty cool. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Was there more to the?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay. Okay. So that kind of segues into the next question really well, because I was gonna ask obviously Vonnegut has an extensive collection of works, and like you said, letters and artwork and things of that nature. So how do you as a curator kind of decide what to put on display, and are there any artifacts or works that you feel like maybe other than Slaughterhouse Five? I feel like that's kind of the default answer, that like must be on display at all times, that are like essential to this experience.
Sorry about that.
Oh, good.
We do have Kurt's typewriter from the 1970s.
Mm.
People typically want to see that. There is a letter that his father wrote to him during the war. In the middle of the letter, it says "Return to sender." At the bottom, it says "Missing January 7th, 45."
Oh wow.
Kurt didn't make it home until July, and that's when his father gave him the letter. We don't know why, but Kurt never opened it, and he left it in Mark Vonnegut's possession. I said I never opened this. I preferred if you didn't either.
Wow.
Now, right now, we've got that. We've got a digital reproduction of it. We've got the letter in our archive room. We're trying to make sure that it doesn't, get exposed to too much light and
Of
temperature
course.
or anything like that. But it has to be on display in some way. So when it comes to really, really sensitive items, we got to be good stewards
Yeah.
about that kind of thing. As far as favorite items, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention we have Kurt Vonnegut's Purple Heart and not
Yes.
the Nazi sword that he walked off with during the war. Um, yeah, in terms of other essential items, well, we have one Vonnegut's Childhood Ice Chest. We never want people to not see that because it's an interesting conversation starter.
Yes.
Not to mention, it's a good thing to bring up the fact that his childhood home is still standing at 4401 North Illinois Street.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. There's a hardware store skeet shooting tournament trophy. Basically, Kurt's great grandfather Clemens Vonnegut, uh, and we have a painting of him too from the late 1800s that I'm really fond of. So it just kind of goes down the list, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a couple greatest hits that people want to see that we have out.
So I kind of have two kind of questions, kind of off script questions from your comments there. So one, the letter, is it still like sealed, or is it open
Oh
now?
yeah, it's still
It's still sealed.
sealed. Like that
Okay.
that letter will remain sealed.
Okay. Okay. And then as far as his childhood home, what's going on with that now? Like, is it just someone's private home? Did it get converted into like a historical site, or?
No, no, I think it's just someone's private home.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's a cool house though.
Yeah. And also, that'd be awesome flex of, being able to say, "Hey, I live in Kurt Vonnegut's house."
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
Almost as cool as his flex of, he stole a Nazi sword. That's
Yep.
I love that.
Yes, indeed.
um. Okay, so I kind of want to talk a little bit about an incident that's pretty recent here. Back in April of 2023, when a masked suspect threw a brick through your guys' front door, allegedly in response to the newsletter, your guys' statement about like censorship and banning books and things of that nature. And we often talk about how institutions and museums need to be audience centered and have a clear message and reach the right audience. Do you think that incident? Well, one, could you explain a little more about that incident? And do you think that incident actually is an indication that you did get your message out there to the right audience?
I don't really know what to say about those
Yeah,
particular incidents. Like it was such a shocking and galling experience. My Okay, my limited understanding. Keep in mind this happened 2 years ago, so I
yeah,
don't
that's fair.
remember the exact circumstances. But like I know that there was a bomb threat called into Indy Reads,
Oh
something
wow,
along the lines of a drag story hour, and then I think we sent out an email. Just I don't think our email mentioned it. I think we just reaffirmed our commitment to freedom to read, and then somebody throws a brick through our door. Um, I don't know that it ever got resolved.
yeah,
I think our opinion on free speech is pretty well known. Like
yeah,
I think Kurt Vonnegut did everything in his power to be a First Amendment absolutist. Um, Super big ACLU supporter.
of course.
He was like did multiple fundraisers for them, type of thing. Like took freedom of expression very, very seriously. Um, I think I lean. Maybe it's a Bradbury quote where he says, "You don't really have to ban books; you just have to build a society where nobody reads them."
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah,
which is a real danger all in itself. Which isn't to say that banning books isn't a danger; that's a danger
right.
too. But I think if you have a a literature curious, or if you have just a curious society in general,
Mhm.
that will be an enormous boon to you. Unfortunately, I think, one way that you need to get people to be literacy minded is through schools
Yep.
and through community. And in order to approach being literature minded, you have to read a pretty diverse
Yeah.
amount of stuff. You have, including
Yeah.
stuff that upsets you or does not
Yeah.
necessarily interest you. Like I have a 6-year old right now, and one of the things he's having to learn is that, look, buddy, sometimes your friends are going to want to play games that
Yeah.
are kind of boring to you.
Yeah.
And in a civil society, sometimes we do things we're not that interested in to, and maybe there's a limit to how much placating others we do in
Right.
society, but there should be some attempt
Yeah.
uh, to go along to get along. And so, like, I think if you have none of that in you as a person, you may find life very lonely.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and I know, like, I could have, I've seen like studies and stuff done of like, people who spend a lot of time in like, particular like internet echo chambers, right? And they
Yeah,
actually are pretty lonely, even though they have this connection, but it's with other like minded people. But yeah, I think you're 100% on the money there. It's like we can only evolve as a society if we have these diverse perspectives. And yeah, that's gonna make you uncomfortable sometimes. And, you might not enjoy it, what you're doing, but it's like, yeah, that's a good lesson for your 6-year-old.
yeah. It's and it's so funny too, because you sometimes see your own flaws in your kids, and
Mm,
we've noticed that my kid can be a real finicky eater, and I've been an extremely finicky eater at various moments in my life. So I feel like such an unbelievable hypocrite at 41, being like, no, you can't eat just grilled cheese sandwiches and hot
yeah,
dogs. Like, there has
yeah.
to be more to your diet. Meanwhile, I'm psychologically thinking, gee, I could really go for a grilled cheese and a hot dog right away.
Yep, yep. I
But
often get in trouble for eating hot dogs and mac and cheese when I cook for myself, so I feel you there.
yeah, and it does sort of come back to Vonnegut, where I think, everybody and their mother always ask me, what would Kurt Vonnegut be writing about today?
Oh,
And they're expecting me to say something political. So
yeah,
I feel like I disappoint them when I say he'd probably take on social media,
yeah.
because
Oh, yeah,
I think Kurt Vonnegut was of a generation, or maybe just himself, that believed that the quality of entertainment and art that you take in matters. It
yes, it
does
does.
stuff to your brain.
Yeah,
So if you're taking in the hot dogs and mac and cheese, as delicious as they are, and no one's saying you can't consume these things within moderation, but if everything you're taking in is just hot dogs and mac and cheese, there's a chance you're doing something to your brain that is maybe not so great.
yeah. Well, that actually kind of, again, in an aside, but the whole rise of like the popcorn movie or the popcorn book, right, where it's kind of just like turn your brain off. And actually, I currently work as a ghostwriter writing those popcorn books, and as for me, I feel like I'm giving up my integrity doing so, because it's like, yeah, it's like when you consume nothing but junk food, it's like, yeah, your brain is going to want junk.
Yeah. Well, the Indianapolis sax player, Jared Thompson,
Mm,
just a phenomenal musician. Used to slaughter the Chatterbox all the time, and he plays at Parlor House now. He had a Facebook post where he talked about how, part of his mission as a musician is to entertain, part of it is to educate.
yeah, yeah.
And I thought, it's so funny. I feel like I've known people in my life who would feel like they wouldn't like that comment because of the entertainer saying part of my job is to educate. But I think that's kind of true, though. Like,
Yeah,
isn't it neat that when someone picks an obscure cover as a musician to cover, you then learn about some musician you never heard of,
exactly.
and it can go
Exactly.
down this, and it's an interesting river of knowledge that you can find yourself swimming
Yeah.
down. And I think Vonnegut was sort of like that too. He was like, I'm a big Mark Twain fan. Here's some other writers I like. Here's some musicians I like that type of thing.
Yeah.
I'm always grateful that he did that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really interesting. But yeah, and it's also just fascinating kind of to keep this chain of conversation going of just like where did we changes the society where the entertainers weren't supposed to, educate and enlighten us, like I feel like that was normal, back in the day.
Yeah, I mean the 30-second soundbite world really concerns me.
Yeah.
I play in a band now, and
Oh,
sometimes on Instagram they're like, "Hey, can we keep these snippets to 30 seconds?" And I'm like, "Sure, I guess that's good advice." But what do we do about a society where 30 seconds is the average attention span?
well, as a teacher, like that was always my biggest struggle was, doing like, I mean, doing any sort of lecture whatsoever, even if I'd try to, spice it up a little bit with like an activity or, showing a video or something. Yeah, it's like the second something goes over a few minutes, it's like you could just see the eyes glaze over, and it was disheartening.
Yeah, I felt genuinely guilty for being a lousy student back in the day. Just because, like, I think it was probably only about a year or two after I became curator of the Vonnegut Museum that I got
Mhm.
sent into a classroom to talk to students directly. And I swear to God, when I was a teenage boy, it never dawned on me that putting my head down to grab a quick cat nap could be seen through the eye of a teacher as an
Yep.
act of disrespect.
Yep. Yep.
Like,
Yep.
yeah, because I was just tired. It's like I got up at 6:30 this morning. And so it's just mind-boggling that I'd walk in the classroom and be like, "Oh, this kind of hurts my feelings."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, your perspectives change as you get older. I mean, that's how you evolve as a person.
I suppose that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, kind of back to the back to the questions. I always love the asides though. But so with a lot of nonprofit institution or not for profit institutions, I always like to say, especially the smaller ones, the way that they survive and thrive is by ingraining themselves into the local community, right? Which you kind of already have touched upon. So, in what ways does the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library sort of make itself a cornerstone of the local kind of Indianapolis or central Indiana community? And have you ever tried to go for that sort of national attention with your efforts?
I think national attention we get from a lot of the book banning efforts, the giving
Of course.
Slaughterhouse Five away for free
Yeah.
to high school students and sometimes younger all over the country. The writers' workshop that we host with Indianapolis Public Schools,
Okay.
where we're encouraging creative writing throughout IPS. That is amazing. Of course, one of the major flagships there is Shortridge High School, Kurt Vonnegut's alma mater. So I mean, that's huge. That's a big a big part of community interaction. We have a mural out on the side of the building by a local Indianapolis artist.
Okay.
I'm gonna blank on her name now. I feel really bad about that. Linda Adani.
Okay.
And it's a phenomenal piece of art. I really love it. So, yeah, we try to be as involved as humanly possible.
Yeah, and I see you guys also do like the virtual teaching Vonnegut workshops. But did you guys still do those or
I think we plan to do it in 2025. I'm not sure if we did
okay.
in 24.
Okay. Okay. Um also just I don't know why this just came to me, but am I correct in thinking that at once upon a time on your website I saw that you guys had a actor interpreter playing Vonnegut at some of your events?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think at Night of Vonnegut, one of our board members, Chris Cecil, has dressed up like Kurt Vonnegut on occasion.
Okay.
I think we've even had, let's see, um, I'm blanking on something here. Oh yeah, we've had Vonnegut lookalike contests as well.
Really? Oh my gosh! Was there a lot of people that entered that, or was that like a
I believe so.
wow?
I know Emma Robertson, who works for Three Floyds now. She used to work for the Legend in Irvington. She won it one
Oh,
year. Yeah,
really? That is fantastic. Oh
yeah,
my gosh! To be a fly on that wall, I would have loved to go to that.
yeah. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Um, so also just kind of with any sort of creative works, the only way that they kind of seem to experience longevity is through like repeated and almost intentional exposure to new audiences, right? So again, I'm thinking of stuff like like the works of Shakespeare, right, that get taught in schools, basically since they came, or almost since they came out, or IPs like stuff like, the Addams Family that was popular in the 60s, then it had a resurgence in the 90s, and now it's getting another little mini resurgence now, right? Or the works of King and Burroughs and Lovecraft and all that. How do you think Vonnegut's works can sort of continue to have that longevity and stay in the public consciousness? Obviously, I know a lot of schools still teach Slaughterhouse-Five, but is there more to it than that, or is that kind of the main one?
There's a tragic, this isn't a word, but there's a tragic stick aroundedness
Okay.
to Vonnegut's work. Like if you read Player Piano, his 1952 debut novel, it's about a society where technology leaves people feeling overwhelmed and useless and put out of work and what have you. And today back then they thought, oh, this is science fiction, and today we'd call
Yeah.
it a documentary.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
some of his work that questions the concept of free will,
Yeah.
whenever I talk in schools, hey, do you ever feel like you're the prisoner of circumstances beyond your control? It doesn't matter how old you are. Someone's probably going to answer yes to that, depending on the day.
Yeah.
And so, when you read in Cat's Cradle, you talk about people who experiment with science without any concern for how their scientific explorations might impact the world. Like I have a very close friend who's super into AI, and
Yeah.
we kind of butt heads about that because I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't care. Like my dream is to never download another app as long as I
Yeah.
live.
Yeah.
The app I want for my phone is phone. I
Yeah.
want to make a
Yep.
I want to make a phone call and receive a phone call. So
Yeah.
I think it's and that's all I wanted to do. So I think Vonnegut was pretty prescient about the fact that there's a healthy mistrust you're supposed to have for people that are so curious about inventing the future that they don't care what kind of scorched earth they leave
Yeah.
behind.
Yep. Yeah. And that's and when I last time I was at your guys' museum and looking over some of the exhibits, and I mentioned this in the podcast episode I did on your guys' museum. One thing that I was kind of not expecting to feel was that sense of what you were just talking about, of like, wow, this is a letter from the 70s or 80s, and we still are talking about this. This is still an issue, right? It's like
Yeah.
I would have thought we would have evolved as a society, or in some cases, some of the things have gotten even worse, and it's like, oh man, okay. But that's the point of a museum. It's supposed to make you think.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I really only have one final question. And I mean, again, we can, talk more or whatever. But what can anyone who's listening to this episode do to help out the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library's mission?
Please become a member.
Okay.
It helps us further our mission, and it will give you free admission year round. And we would love to have you as an active participant in what we're doing. We need volunteers.
Okay.
We need supporters.
Okay.
The army, the peaceful army of Vonnegut.
I love that. I love that. So not Dumbledore's army, but Vonnegut's
Yeah,
army.
yeah, not Dumbledore's army, Vonnegut's army.
I
The
love
VA.
the VA. Become the
Yeah,
new VA of Indianapolis.
yeah.
um, but
I'm pretty
yeah,
sure the VA is trademarked, but okay.
yeah, maybe the I don't know, the KVA. There we go. We can call it the
The
KVA.
KVA, the KVA.
But yeah, no, and I'll just kind of reiterate this. I have been to the Vonnegut Museum a handful of times. I discover something new every time I go. It is so much fun. I really love your guys' mission and what you guys do for the local community. And I really, really appreciate you coming on this show. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you're so welcome, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So hopefully I will see you the next time I am in the museum, which I'm planning on coming pretty soon here. So maybe I'll swing by and say hi.
All right, sounds great, man. Take care.
Yep. Thank you so much for your time.
Bye.
So there you have it. Hopefully you learned a little bit more today about Vonnegut and his legacy and what you can do to kind of help keep it alive. If nothing else, as he said in the interview, hopefully this stimulates your curiosity to learn a little bit more and take a more active role in your community. Um, but once again, big thank you from the bottom of my heart to Chris and the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library for participating in this little podcast of mine. Words cannot describe how much I appreciate that. And hopefully, you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm Austin Baker of Baker's Dozens Productions, and I will see you on the next episode of Exploring Experiences.